We are going to go ahead and get started here today. I'd like to welcome you all. Really excited to be here with these amazing transportation planners, Tom, Megan, and Maria. Want to first start off by thanking our sponsor, Maverick, for being a wonderful sponsor of our conference here today. I'm Angela Price. I am a policy and project manager for Salt Lake City in the Housing and Neighborhood Development Division. And I'm also the co-chair of the APA Utah Legislative Committee. I'm so excited to be here moderating this panel with my good friends. These are the top planning and transportation folks here in Utah, so we're so fortunate to have them. Real quickly, going to introduce our panelists and then go over some ground rules and we'll get started. So we have Tom Millar, one of my colleagues in Salt Lake City. He's a transportation planner for the Transportation Division. He's the client project manager for the Salt Lake City Street and Intersection Typologies Design Guide. His professional work centers on transforming streets into economically and socially successful places. Meg Townsend with WFRC is the Transportation and Land Use Connection Program Manager, which is a technical assistance program administered by WFRC, Wasatch Front Regional Council, and partnered with the Utah Department of Transportation, Utah Transit Authority, and Salt Lake County. In addition to her work at WFRC, Meg serves as board treasurer for the Seven Canyons Trust nonprofit organization and is currently the community outreach chair of the Utah chapter of the Urban Lands Institute. She has a master's of city and metropolitan planning from the University of Utah with a graduate certificate of real estate development. And then lastly, but certainly not least, we have Maria Valles, AICP, is a senior associate in the Salt Lake City office of Fair and Peers with 22 years of experience in transportation and land use planning. She thrives on projects that require creative, interdisciplinary, I cannot say that word this morning, methods of evaluating complex issues. She is the consultant project manager for the Salt Lake City Street and Intersection Typology Design Guide, leading the development of typologies for all Salt Lake City streets. She has led regional transportation planning projects, such as the Wasatch Front Central Corridor Study, the Utah Collaborative Active Transportation Study, and the First Last Mile Strategy Study for the Utah Transit Authority. She's a graduate from the U and a member of the American Planning Association. Welcome, guys. So excited to have you here this morning. Just a little housekeeping thing. Please add your questions to the chat. The panelists have set aside about 30 minutes at the end to answer your questions. So feel free to add them to the chat throughout the presentation, and then we'll circle back when the panelists have finished presenting their content. With that, I'll turn it over to you guys. Thank you.
All right, is my screen sharing okay? Awesome. Well, like Angela said, my name is Tom Millar. We're going to start with a little bit of a thought exercise for all of the attendees, as well as the panelists. I want you to think of the best street you've ever been on. What does it have? How do you feel? What is it about it that makes it the best street you've ever been on? And we'll have some silent meditative thought for about 15 or 20 seconds. Okay, I'm going to ask Angela this question. Angela, what's the best street you've ever been on and why?
Oh, I really like this street in Boston, and because it had beautiful old historic trees and beautiful historic homes and very large, wonderful trees with a park going through the center of it. It was very walkable. It felt like I was in a forest, but I was in downtown urban Boston.
Awesome. So this is a very therapist thing to say, but how did that make you feel?
It made me feel very warm and fuzzy on the inside. It was nice. It felt like I wasn't in a city, and I felt safe walking there. I felt safe being there. It was nice to have like beautiful landscape and big trees. And so it felt like a really good place to be. Like you could just sit and hang out under a tree there, even though you were in the middle of a street.
Awesome. Thank you. I hope that everybody, all of the attendees and the panelists, will keep in mind the streets that came to mind as I asked that question and as we talk about this Typologies Design guide that we're doing in Salt Lake City. The purpose of the guide is to make streets the best streets that we've ever been on. And just as a plug, the second slide is going to be a picture of my baby eating a banana the wrong way, but eating a banana nonetheless. She's napping right now, or else I'd hold her up and you guys could meet her. Okay, so why are streets important? Streets make up 80% of our public space in our cities. Now think of that. Every park, government building, library, plaza, 80% of all of our space that is not private space is streets. And so therefore streets kind of define who we are as a community and what we value. But primarily they're focused on pretty much one purpose, and that's moving or parking motor vehicles. And that's not just a problem for safety and for livability, but it's also a problem because we have so many more needs than just driving. Our cars sit parked for about 95% of their life, yet we dedicate so much space to them when they're moving that we really don't have much space left for any of our other human day-to-day needs. Another reason why it's important to look at streets is that our needs change. Our ways of doing business, our ways of getting things to our house, Amazon Prime, for example, all of those things have changed, but our streets have pretty much stayed the same since they've been developed. This design guide helps adapt our streets to our current and our future needs. So kind of as a summary, streets are the lifeblood of our communities, and they're the common denominator in successful, safe, high quality, equitable communities. And we feel that we can do better with our street design. So here's what the design guide does that we've been working on now for about 20 months. It fuses transportation and land use. It's like zoning for streets. It's a framework. It's not form-based code, but it is a framework that helps to identify how that street should look in the future. It designs better streets that are smaller and safer and slower. It also develops a street typology that is the right size for the right place. And we'll show you the map that we've developed a little bit later on. And it gets back to this traditional use of streets to promote quality of life, commerce, social structure, safety, and good design. And I think that having streets that are the right size is one of the most conservative choices that we can make, because it saves us a lot of money and it saves our taxpayers a lot of money. They also ensure the health, safety, and welfare of the public, as well as providing real transportation choices rather than just having the car as the primary or only choice. The project also began the process of defining the desired changes to and updating our complete streets ordinance, which is turning 10 years old this year. And then lastly, this whole process and the result itself has given us a better and more unified vision as a city, getting everybody on the same page and having designs that show what all of our priorities are together in one concise package. One way that we developed this vision was by having a technical advisory committee. The technical advisory committee was made up of representatives of every department and division in the city that deals with the public right-of-way, as well as our partners at WFRC, at UDOT, and at UTA. And it has been an awesome process to work together, and we're going to tell you a little bit more about that. So let me dive a little bit more into the why and then I'll give you a brief at a glance of the design guide, and then we'll tell you more about the process. So the why. Why do we want to change our streets? Well, to be frank, our streets are bankrupting us. We spend way more money maintaining our streets than our streets give back to us. So I like to think of streets, because they do make up 80% of our public spaces, as either producers of wealth or consumers of wealth. They're either assets or they're liabilities, and often we put them in the wrong column. We think that they are assets when really we're just sinking money into them without getting anything back. So we want to make productive streets. I mentioned earlier that wide streets are unsafe. And so this design guide focuses a lot on design speed, or target speed, where the design of the roadway dictates how fast people drive and how they move, rather than just a sign on the road or the threat of a ticket. And we don't want our streets to be too wide. We also don't want them to be too narrow. We have a lot of uses in the street and a lot of purposes of streets, and we don't want to inhibit those uses. So the right size for the right place is kind of a key for this project. And lastly, context matters. The street that you see up on the screen right now is a residential street. It just has single family homes on the side of it. Yet you can see how wide it was built, and pretty much unnecessarily. None of that space, except for where the car is driving or where the bike might be riding, is really usable for anything but driving. And you can kind of get the sense of how fast you would drive down a street like that. So looking just a block north, this exact same street with the exact same land uses has a very different design. So why is there a difference? Different eras of development, different developers, and different city standards as time went on. So what we would like to do with this project is to bring all of our standards in line with each other and make sure that our streets are the right size for the right place. And Megan's going to tell you a little bit more about transportation and land use.
Hi, yeah, thanks, Tom. So the Transportation and Land Use Connection Program funded the majority of this project. The project that you'll hear all about today received about $100,000 from the TLC program. This program, the Transportation and Land Use Connection Program, is all about planning technical assistance. It's available within the Wasatch Front Regional Council region, but there is also a kind of a sister program through UDOT, the technical planning program that is available statewide. The TLC mission is to support local governments in their planning efforts, implementing the Wasatch Choice Vision. The program is a partnership between UDOT, UTA, Salt Lake County, and the Wasatch Front Regional Council. And really, the focus of the program, of course, connecting transportation and land use. Our projects seem to focus most on the space between kind of the public realm and the private realm. And this project was absolutely, that was the center of it, right? Making decisions about streets. It's the ultimate intersection of land use and transportation in a lot of ways. The TLC program goals include maximize the value of investment in public infrastructure, enhance access to opportunities, increase travel options to optimize mobility, and creating communities with opportunities to live, work, and play. And eligible projects are just those that meet the goals of the program. And of course, they're planning work, not capital improvement. And why does Wasatch Front Regional Council, which is responsible for producing the long-range regional transportation plan, why does the WFRC care about land use planning, and why are we providing this assistance? As you all know well, land use decisions influence a lot of things. This is not an exhaustive list, but traffic, mode share, transportation choices, access to jobs, access to education, access to healthcare, so getting places, air quality, housing affordability, water use, commute times, open space, community equity, and a whole lot of other things. So where things go matters for transportation, and it matters for our quality of life as a region. So that's why we have this program, and that's why projects like this are completely within what we want to assist with. The Wasatch Front could be adding about a Taylorsville every year for the next 30 years. That's about 50 to 60,000 people. And so and a lot of that is, 2/3 of that is from natural increase. So as we grow and change as a region, we want to be there to support. And so that's what we do with TLC. And the Transportation and Land Use Connection, of course, implements our Wasatch Choice vision, which communities within the region weigh in on. They tell us how they're going to grow, and then we put it into a regional vision. So we're here to help communities figure that out. The vision is essentially an overlaid network of transportation and land use, right? And so where the nexus of those two things come together, that's what we're working on with TLC. And we're trying to do it in a collaborative way, bringing all the partners to the table. And this project absolutely was centered around collaboration. So we're glad we were able to support, and glad we have great people working on it.
Thanks, Megan. So we're going to give a real brief sneak peek at the design guide, and then we'll get into more detail later in the presentation. But this is kind of the bread and butter of the design guide, our cross sections and information that went into 15 new types of streets. There kind of used to be only 3 types: major or arterial, minor or a collector, and a local street. But those didn't match the contexts and various contexts that we had within Salt Lake City. We also knew that every street needed to achieve more than just the vehicle mobility function. So we developed these 5 critical functions of the public right-of-way and made sure that every design had space for each of these functions. And we did prioritize some a little bit higher than the others, depending on the place type. And these are the place types that we developed. It was a pretty broad generalization of the city's dozens and dozens of zoning types, so that we knew how our streets needed to look differently depending on the area that they were in. And then we applied we applied one of the 15 typologies to each of our 8,400 street segments in the city. And you can see these colors, they're kind of clustered in different areas. So that can kind of show you where our land uses change, and then therefore where our street designs change. And then looking toward the future, we know that implementation of the design guide is not going to be like your ordinary master plan. It's really just a reference manual. It's a book of ideas for when and if a project is built or a street needs to be reconstructed. It does not make these sweeping changes all at once. And in fact, when people ask me, oh, how long is it going to take to finish implementation of the design guide, I say, oh, I don't know, it might be a couple hundred years. And we recognize that this is by no means a perfect design guide, and just like zoning, and just like our planning guidance will have to be updated as the city changes, as people change, and as our needs change. So we're going to tell you a little bit about the process, how we got there.
Okay, thanks, Tom. So I'm going to go through a few slides here that are really all about kind of what was happening in the background in the sausage making, and not all of it was pretty. I'm sure you're surprised. But the first thing that Tom and I did before we were even actually under contract as consultants was go and meet one-on-one with the heads of all the different departments at Salt Lake City, because we wanted to get a sense of what their priorities were, what their concerns were. We wanted to understand what their expectations were, and there were a lot of them. But we also wanted to understand kind of what background documents there were, what kind of foundation there was to stand from. And then we engaged everyone, representatives from all of these departments, as our technical advisory committee, and worked with them throughout the process to keep everybody engaged and help inform us as we moved through it. So I would also included updating a complete streets policy ordinance also. We're not going to get too much into that today. But starting for us from the consultant sides of things, when we started this project, we had done something really similar in Alameda County, California. Maybe go forward a couple of slides. There we go. Where we had put together a multimodal arterial plan for all the arterials in Alameda County. It was really similar in a lot of ways. It was also a situation where the the communities wanted to assign a typology to each and every roadway in the county, so that, you know, when the time came to make improvements to roadways, they knew kind of what the blueprint was for those things. It was a little bit different though. Like Salt Lake County or Salt Lake City really had and this was a good lesson learned here as well for any communities that want to maybe try to do something like this. Salt Lake City already had some good baseline documents in place, some good planning, modal plans that we were able to rely on. So we were kind of, when we started, thinking we were going to do something like, okay, we're going to identify the key land uses, and then for each key land uses, we're going to say, okay, here's a transit-oriented street, or a pedestrian-oriented street, or a bicycle-oriented street, whatever, and then that's going to influence what the design of each one of these roadways is, because it's going to be about what mode takes priority on each one of those streets. And so that's kind of where we started. So we, you know, I mean, in some senses, this was like just a master GIS exercise where we took all that kind of information. We're like, okay, where are the UDOT roads? Because we know there's going to be a different set of design standards that get applied to those. What are the planned bicycle and pedestrian facilities that the city's already given some thought to? What are the elements that are on the frequent transit network? On top of that, we knew there was a separate set of transit high investment corridors that the city really wanted to go to a different level of investment on, and that the cross sections for those might actually look quite a bit different. And then we also, you know, part of this was understanding to where the kind of the greening features were within the city, and how do we take advantage of those, and how do we incorporate those into our plans. So we were kind of in the process of like mashing all of these sets of data onto one master set of GIS files. It was the street centerline file, and we just were smushing stuff on top of it and adding, you know, pieces of information as far as like, is it on the bike network or not? Is it on the transit network or not? And, you know, Salt Lake City had the advantage of already having a ped bike master plan, a transit master plan, that were really helpful because somebody had already given thought to like what the priorities needed to be on these different streets. So we were kind of like adding all those things in and getting through all of those transportation pieces. And then we kind of like had to hit the brakes a little bit, because the piece that was missing was the land use. We had walked into this assuming that Salt Lake City would have some kind of like map or generalized sense of what big land use categories were, right? So like downtown areas versus like little neighborhood nodes versus, you know, residential areas or other kinds of things like that. City didn't have that. City had a parcel map of land uses by parcel, but that was way too granular for what we needed. And then, you know, a unique fun thing about Salt Lake City is that they don't have one general plan land use map like a lot of cities do, which would have been super helpful. What they had were different neighborhood plans that all had kind of a different language around what their land use types were. So it was really kind of a challenge to figure out how to mash all those things together, and it led to a little bit of friction between, you know, our side on the consultant side saying like, that's really like not in our scope, and I don't know that we have a dog in the fight of figuring out what the different place types are that we should be using here. And so the city ended up putting those together and landing on some different kind of land use or place type categories. We got through that part, and then Tom's laughing. We were, you know, getting prepared to do our like, okay, so here's this place type that's destination district, and we're going to say that this is a pedestrian oriented street in this type kind of place type, and here's an urban village, and this is a bicycle oriented street. We were like fully prepared to go ahead and do that. And then it became really clear that the city really wanted to do something else, that in the time since which we had gotten under contract and gotten to the point where we were at, that the city had started thinking in a more evolved way about how they wanted to treat the right-of-way, and have it be more about what should our priorities be for that space? Not necessarily about like what mode of transportation should be prioritized, but more about like, is this straight for placemaking? Is it for greening? Is it primarily about people getting access to the curb for on-street parking, or for like bike stations or bike parking, or, you know, whatever that might be. And so we kind of, I mean, I remember a phone call like with the city and my colleague Tim at Fair and Piers, and us being like, oh, okay, so we really have to figure out how to completely pivot what we were going to do here and think about something else. So I think a key message here is being flexible and adaptable. It definitely is not my first nature, but we had to figure out how to do it. So we ended up working with the city folks through a process of having a conversation around each one of these place types, and we're going to get to what those are in just a moment. How do we think that each place type should prioritize those different uses within the right-of-way? And so what you're seeing here is the result of a very analog exercise with our steering committee that represented, different groups within Salt Lake City. It was engineering and transportation and planning and WFRC. Megan was part of this as well. But everybody got a chance to put a Post-it on the window here. These are our windows in our office for, like, I think that in a residential neighborhood, greening should be the top priority, followed by placemaking, followed by personal mobility, or whatever that was. And so we went through this whole process of, like, everybody putting their priorities up and then developing consensus around those. And it was convenient because there was already some degree of consistency and consensus around what people thought in certain areas. And then other places where there wasn't consistency, we had to kind of just talk through it. It was real messy, took a while, but we got there. And so I think Tom is now going to talk us through what those categories are and how that works.
Yeah, and I think Maria brings up a good point about flexibility, and that was something that I learned as a project manager and as a transportation planner, was that, okay, if we're really going to be serious about merging transportation and land use, then, no pun intended, we as transportation planners kind of have to take ourselves out of the driver's seat and ensure that transportation is not the leading authority or the leading purpose of our streets, because that was the problem we were trying to fix. We knew that for a long time, our streets have pretty much just served a transportation purpose, but with all of that wealth of space that we have as cities, we knew that they could do more. And we knew that our residents wanted them to do more in order to achieve the various needs that they had in their life. So this was the first blush at these 5 functions. We had person mobility, vehicle mobility, placemaking, greening. Those are still the same. Access, we just changed the name of it to curbside uses because it was a little bit more descriptive of where in the right-of-way it was talking about. But we knew that there was going to be that different modes or different uses, different types of use were going to occupy the spaces dedicated to each of these right-of-way functions. And then we knew that it was probably going to be associated with a particular transportation modal network or choice too. So like Maria said, we then prioritized these based on the place type. We knew that in a neighborhood, that greening and person mobility were going to be more important, not only because of what we know about the context of Salt Lake City, but because of the input that we got from the public, and I'll mention that in a couple slides. But in a downtown or a destination district, we knew that placemaking and ensuring that it was a memorable place was also really important, and that vehicle mobility was not as high a priority because that was your destination. You were already arriving there. You didn't need to maintain 40 miles an hour as you went around the destination district, because that would probably subvert all of the other purposes of the right-of-way. So these are the final 5 that we decided on, and we asked the public, how would you rank these based on different areas in your life, different areas in your day-to-day? And I'll show you what the survey results said. This was last fall, late summer, fall, so about a year ago. People told us that no matter where, no matter who they were, no matter their age, no matter the neighborhood that they lived in, and also no matter what transportation choice they used the most, they thought that accommodating person mobility and greening in the public right-of-way were the 2 most important functions of the public right-of-way. So there's a close-up of that data. Now, just because vehicle mobility is low does not mean that we're not going to accommodate it. We know that it exists now. We know that it'll probably exist even in this ideal future where we've right-sized our streets. So none of the typologies remove vehicles from the roadway. They just seek to identify areas where the other functions can be prioritized over vehicle mobility. This is what people told us by the type of place in their day-to-day, either near their home or near work or near schools and parks or near shopping. And those were kind of the common places that people visited day to day or week to week. And it was interesting to see some of the variation, that greening wasn't as important to people near shopping and work, but vehicle mobility was. And that no matter the place type, again, person mobility was the highest of any other right-of-way function. And if you'd like to see more detailed results of this survey, they are at the bottom of the project webpage, which is at the bottom of this slide. Another thing we developed in order to figure out if our typologies once implemented were successful were these performance measures. We came up with probably 20 or 25 performance measures, and we knew that some of them could be incorporated into the designs themselves, that they wouldn't have to be really data that we collected after the fact, and that we could build in the desired performance into the design itself. While others, like how long does it take people to walk and bike places, could be things that we could monitor after the fact. We also got critical design dimensions from our technical advisory committee, like how big is a garbage truck and how big is a tracks platform, how wide is a gutter, and what types of trees should we have on particular streets, so that the typologies were as realistic and implementable as possible. And then lastly, our agency partners were so critical to the process, because the Typologies Design Guide does not just apply designs, proposed designs, to city streets. It's every street in Salt Lake City. So working together as equal partners and having these partner agencies write their sections of the design guide's implementation chapter, so that it was very clear what their role was going to be, what our role was going to be, and how we were going to work together to implement and maintain these facilities. It was a really awesome process. So all of those things together, that was a lot, and that was about 1.5 years worth of work. All of those things together, we put it in a hopper, and out comes these 15 typologies that I mentioned earlier. You can see that we had at least a couple, if not multiple, kind of up to 4 typologies per place type, and then we had 3 typologies that were place type agnostic. And so once we had these designs, which I'll show you in a second, we put them back out to the public and we asked, did we get it right? Did we apply your priorities that you told us last year correctly? And what do you think of these designs and where we applied them? And now we're working on synthesizing all of that feedback into the final draft of the design guide. So let me give you an intro to what the typical typology looks like. This is number 7 of 15. And these were developed by our consultant team, a sub-consultant to Fair & Pierce, Gale Studio out of New York City. So this is the information table that feeds the designs that we'll see a little bit later on. We have right-of-way widths. These are ranges, because we know that we've applied them to different streets with different widths of right-of-way and amount of space that we can work with. Next are the different elements that make up that right-of-way, the parts, bike lanes, buses, trains, sidewalks, parking, travel lanes, and how wide they are. The planning and zoning information, which is very key, as we've mentioned. What do the buildings next to the street look like? How tall are they? How far back from the street are they? And what kind of demands do they put on the street? And then these more traditional transportation planning terms like functional classification, we keep that in the background, our arterial collector and local, as well as the number of cars that are likely to be on that street, so that we don't design a street that's too wide or has too many lanes, or too narrow or has too few lanes. And then, as I mentioned before, we have this criteria called target speed, which is basically make the right speed the easiest speed to drive. Don't put up a sign that says 40 and then design the street to be 70. Or don't put up a sign that says 15 and design the street to be 30. We want people by design to be making the right decisions and to be moving slower and more safely through the city. And then lastly, again, we have these 5 functions of the right-of-way and how they are prioritized differently based on the land use and the transportation demands on that street. So here's a look at that typical sheet that we have for each of those 15 typologies. We have a cross-section with dimensions and different right-of-way elements defined. We also have a plan view to show how this might change as you move through the street, because it's not all about just designing at mid-block. This is a street that would be a collector street in like a small business district, where there's a lot of space for people, for deliveries, for transferring between the more pedestrian realm and the vehicle realm. And here's an example of maybe what that might look like. This is an example from Midville, Oregon. Here's another typology, one of our major typologies, some of the widest, that we've applied to many UDOT streets. 2 to 3 lanes in each direction, maybe like 400 South in downtown, or parts of Redwood or State Street. Here's an example from New York of what that might look like. Obviously, greening is a pretty important priority for us as a city. This is one of our smallest typologies. This is a small commercial street in a downtown, similar to maybe Regent Street, if you've been on Regent. And this is an example from Boston, Massachusetts, of also what an implementation like that might look like. You can notice on these typologies that the buildings on the sides of the streets change as the typology changes, so that it's very reflective of what type of place that street might be going through. So this is a neighborhood connector street, maybe like, if you're familiar with Salt Lake City, like parts of 1700 South or parts of 300 North, that have mostly residential uses, but need to provide some type of a connection to local streets and also to arterial streets. Here's an example from the Netherlands of what that might look like. So what's going on right now? Well, we've developed these 15 distinct draft typologies, and we've applied one typology to every street in the city. And we've, like I said, put that back out to the public and asked them, not only do you agree or disagree with the typology, but do you agree or disagree with the application of that typology, either on the street that you live on, or the street that your favorite business is on, or what have you. And we've gotten a lot of feedback, and it's awesome feedback, and we're working right now to make changes. So we had that public review period that just ended at the end of August, and now we're working on finalizing the design guide, working with council on the adoption process and what changes we can make to make it as good as possible before adoption. So now we're going to show you even a little bit more about how the sausage was made and some of the lessons that we learned behind the scenes, because it wasn't perfect. It looks nice, but we want you guys to understand how things really went and the things that we learned, so that you can take those lessons and apply them to your projects as well.
So I think one of the most key things that contributed to us hopefully succeeding with this project was the involvement of all the different departments at Salt Lake City. And so if you think back to that wheel that we showed before, I mean, it was, you know, maybe 10 to 12 different departments, and we had representatives from all of those departments involved. And one of the things that we kind of caught on to was that there is not always a lot of communication between the people that are in those different departments, between the people that plan the projects and execute the projects, and then the people who have to maintain the projects. So this was what you're seeing here as one of our technical advisory committee meetings, and we did this exercise that was A, really fun, and B, really enlightening, called Who Owns the Street? And basically we had everybody sit down and look at a kind of a photo of a cross section. So I think this is 3rd West, just west of Main Street downtown, and say, okay, what is your department responsible for and the pieces of this right away? And let's put Post-its up on the screen here for who's responsible for what. And what became really clear was that there are a lot of agencies or a lot of departments that are responsible for the same piece of land or the same piece of the right of way for totally different purposes that don't always communicate with each other. And we found that there were actually departments that like felt bad, that they felt like they had been left out of the process. They had hurt feelings. They were like, you guys go and you build these projects, and then we're expected to maintain them, and nobody has told us about them. Nobody has asked us about maintenance needs. Nobody has asked us, like, for example, there was a real estate division within Salt Lake City. I didn't even know they existed. I had a lot to learn, obviously. But they were like, you know, you guys do these projects, but then we're the ones that have to deal with licensing requirements, or when people want to get sidewalk dining permits. You guys don't even think about those things. So that was a really eye-opening experience, and really great to have, educational in a way too, to have like everybody talking about like, no, this is what we do, and oh, that's what you guys do? Okay, well, we should be communicating together. And I remember like somebody from one of these departments saying like, we don't even know who's responsible for this particular piece here. And somebody else in the room saying like, oh, that's us. I can like connect you to the right people. So kind of fun just to see that all come together. Another thing that we learned is that there's kind of repeating issues that come up. So, and if any of you out there decide to do something similar, you're gonna run into these things as well. So I referred to kind of the disconnect between sometimes the planning and execution implementation people and the operations people. So you can get funding to build this, but we don't have money to maintain it, whether that is, you know, building new cycle tracks that have to have a different kind of curb, or different kind of thermoplastics on the ground for the stencils, making sure that we communicate with the people that are responsible for those maintenance at the ongoing life cycle costs of these kinds of projects is really important. We heard a lot about snow storage and snow removal, especially when we started talking about different kind of bike lane facilities that are going to require a different kind of snow removal equipment. And who's going to pay for that? And does the project pay for that? Or is that just something that the operations budgets have to take on? If they clear the snow from the protected bike lanes, then where does it go? Does it go into the sidewalk? You know, what issues do you have there? Spent a lot of time talking about that. Spent a lot of time also talking about the fire code and the very narrow envelope that the fire code, you know, can allow for needing to be not too far away from the buildings in order to serve them, but also not too close, so that, like, there's something about ladders, I don't know, that's a whole other level of detail. And then, you know, it's kind of funny, like we had a steering committee that we were working with and with different representatives, and we were talking about, you know, like the different elements of placemaking and stuff and where people would want to see that done. And, you know, like placemaking seems kind of innocuous and fine, but we had one of our steering committee members saying, like, well, that's all fine and good, but I don't want people placemaking in front of my house. You know, like everybody's kind of got their thoughts about what they feel is appropriate in front of their house or not. So, oh, and then also, you know, like different agencies, different departments have their standards for what they think the design speed should be, as Tom's referred to. We had some conversations around what's the difference between a design speed and a target operating speed, like how we would actually want people to drive. So a lot of conversations that had to be had around those issues as well, that I think are applicable to a lot of communities that maybe have roads that are really too wide for the land uses around them. And I think Tom's going to speak to the next one.
Yeah, I think that similar to the phrase, there's no such thing as bad publicity, I think that there's also no such thing as bad feedback or bad discussion. We got all of these things, and these are very common issues that we run into, but often they're had in separate rooms and separate silos. And not only were we able to bring people into the same room, but then we were able to translate all of these different standards and ways of doing things into a very concise document that shows it visually, so that you don't have to comb through 10 different books to find how something should be done, and so that things are better knit together. Similarly, as a city agency, we got a lot of feedback from the public asking questions like, well, what does this mean for me? Are you rebuilding my street right now? Is this, should I find a new place to live? And so I think a lesson learned for us as a city is that we could have done a much better job at addressing these very common questions that really didn't occur to us to explain, because we're kind of, you know, we're these planners and we kind of understand it already, and we've made these assumptions that many other people have not made. So during this public input period that just ended, we had we developed these answers to frequently asked questions. Something as simple as what does the design guide do? We thought we had explained it well on the webpage, but due to I think maybe a lack of clarity or a lack of conciseness, that message really didn't come through very clear. And so we developed this short answer sheet that did calm some of those fears and answered some of those really basic questions about the process. And so I'd invite you to look at these answers, and as you potentially begin a typologies project or any type of design project, try to consider some of those questions that your public may have, and address them before they turn into misinformation. The project was pretty high level, and it's a complicated concept to grasp. You're going to design something, but you're not going to build it. You're going to design it now, but it might not happen for 100 years. It's very difficult for most non-planners to kind of grasp that kind of time frame. And so utilizing the resources that we have, such as the news media, in order to explain these concepts very basically to the people that read those articles was definitely a tool in our toolbox that we utilized, but maybe utilized a little bit too late. So Megan's going to take us home, and then at the end, we're going to share our kind of final thoughts about the project.
So at this point, some of you might be thinking, well, this is really cool, good for Salt Lake City, but what about my city or town? We all know Salt Lake City is a little bit different. It's got a lot of people. You know, for most cities, we wouldn't be holding a workshop of 40 people. That's actually just staff department representatives, right? But a project similar to this one for your city might align expectations with staff, leadership in the community. It might solidify responsibilities internally, communicate with transportation agencies, right? There was a heavy collaboration component to this project that I think any city could certainly benefit from. It might simplify the whole process, right? Of whatever it is, from greenfield to a completed neighborhood, right? It might help streamline that, and it could enhance the quality of life throughout your city, just as I think it will for Salt Lake City. My plug is a lot less cute than Tom's baby, but if this project has piqued your interest, there is the call for Transportation and Land Use Connection Program letters of intent has gone out, and those are due September 30th. It's a Google form, and it's the same Google form that UDOT will be using for their technical planning assistance funds that are available statewide. So whether you're in the WFRC region or not, this might be something that we, the transportation agencies, can help you with. And it might look like this one, it might look a lot different, but I think that the city found this process to be very beneficial. And I know I learned a lot, so if this is interesting to you, be sure to reach out and let's see if we can make something happen for your city.
So I'll conclude with my final thoughts, and then I'll have Megan go, and then Maria go. The process, as Megan outlined in the last slide, is really everything. It's about learning together, and it's about this final outcome that's better than where we started from. And it's going to get messy. I mean, we've told you how messy it gets. It's going to get worse before it gets better. You're going to open up a lot of wounds, and you're going to talk with a lot of people that have a lot of maybe pent up grievances about that process. But in the end, the idea is then to bring all of that back together and synthesize it into something that can help everybody to move forward in a unified manner. And then kind of my last thought is streets should be for everybody. They should be for everybody's different needs, and they should be designed for every type of place that we might be in. And I'd like you guys to think about this design guide not as something that's only possible in Salt Lake City, but something that really can be applied to any town or city, no matter its size, because every town and city has streets, and every town and city has problems with its streets and things that they want to do better. And so I hope that you'll reach out and ask us any questions that you have. I think Megan and then Maria, and then we'll get some questions answered.
So I guess my lasting thought here is that collaboration made this project really challenging. Certainly, it was extensive. It really reached into all corners of who might be a stakeholder in this project. But collaboration also made this project meaningful. And I think without the hyper focus on bringing everybody to the table, we might have ended up with something really cool, but not quite as useful, and it wouldn't have had quite as lasting of an effect on the city. So collaboration is key, of course.
Okay, I think my final thought would be kind of to reiterate that flexibility is key. And it's, you know, it was flexibility in the process for us, but it's going to be flexibility in the application of these designs as well, because as Thomas mentioned, these are not prescriptive. These are not oh, here's a thing and we just stamp it on this road here and that's how that's going to work. It needs to be responsive to what the community wants and adaptable. And that's why there's ranges in a lot of those right-of-way sections, so that you can say, okay, well, we don't have that much right-of-way available, so we're gonna do the smaller end of things, or yeah, the community really wants a really great big median or huge landscape strips along the side here, so we've got that flexibility. But you know, we tried to have them be adaptable so that they could be applied in a way that was appropriate given the context of each neighborhood street.
Great, thank you guys so much. What a great presentation, and super informative to see what all went into the Street Typologies project. So we have a few questions here in the chat, and I encourage the participants to please enter your questions into the chat so we can keep this awesome conversation going here. So we have a question from Dorothy. How is 2200 West within the Northwest Quadrant from 700 North to the Davis County line categorized? How does this fit into the proposed North Point Master Plan update?
Well, that sounds like a question for me if I've ever heard it. Thanks, Dorothy. That's a really awesome question. I believe that 2200 West in that section is identified to a point as one of our industrial and business park streets. And then as you get north of 2200 West, it turns into a, this is me pulling on my memory, it turns into a neighborhood, I think it turns into a neighborhood corridor or into a neighborhood street, kind of that smallest scale of place types, because the land use does change pretty significantly. And it fits into the North Point Master Plan in that the North Point Master Plan identifies the areas that should remain as they are, the areas that should change, and how the community wants to look in the future, and what types of activities they want to encourage in that area. So whether it's over there in North Point, whether it's in Sugar House or the Avenues, we pulled these values from these neighborhood master plans and tried to incorporate them as much as possible into the typologies. Now, we mentioned flexibility. Typologies are absolutely flexible because we know that things change, and we know that generalizing all of our place types into just 5 and generalizing all of our street types into just 15 may not be granular enough. And so they're really just going to act as our starting point as we seek to implement a street design change, a starting point to discuss with the community and make sure that it fits in with what they want.
Great,
thanks, Dorothy.
Did anybody else want to add anything to that? No? Okay. We also had a question about being able to access the slides. I know the league is going to be posting the recordings of the presentations on their website. Tom or Maria, are you able to speak to if these slides could be maybe posted on the website for the project?
I would be comfortable doing that, and I'll just add a note to any of the slides that have the design parts of the typologies on them, and that is showing the draft typologies that may change before it gets adopted. So okay. Thanks for that, Jill.
Great. We have a question from Scott. What recommendations would you have for applying this same type of analysis to smaller communities with fewer roadway types or fewer distinct development districts?
Tom, do you want me to start on that one?
That sounds great. Yeah, I'd love to hear yours and Megan's opinions on that.
Okay. I think it would actually be easier on a community that had a smaller, I mean, it's the same kind of process where you identify what your land use types are and then what your roadway types are. But part of the complication that we had was that there was a desire to have so many, and from the consultant side, developing each one of those 15 typologies costs money, right? Those are individual work efforts. And so I think it could be done a lot more simply for smaller communities that had fewer sets of land use types, fewer types of roadways. A lot of the same conversations that we've had, like for instance that we had with UDOT, will still apply in smaller communities, because I know a lot of smaller communities have issues with their main street being a UDOT road and it being, you know, not really appropriate to a main street kind of context. So I think it's very transferable.
I definitely agree with Maria. I mean, the scale of this project just was big because of the scale of the city in a lot of ways. I mean, you can tell from Tom basically having the map memorized in his head. That this was, some projects that we do through the program have a lot more, okay, consultant, take this, bring it back, we'll react. This project was not like that. A major piece of this project was just staff collaboration amongst the city. And I think any city can benefit from that. I definitely think one thing that, you know, even if they're a very small city, one thing that benefited this project a lot was Maria and Tom discussed going around to the different departments before we were even really moving on this project to ask about, you know, what do you want to get out of this effort, or what do you think about it? And really you could do that and ask each of your departments, you know, how many place types do you think we have? How many different kinds of streets do you think we have? And you're already going to start building that conversation, and you might land on fewer than, you know, 15 for the city. But I think that even that conversation alone is valuable.
Great, thank you. Tom, did you have anything to add?
No, I don't think so. That was excellent.
Good. I have a bit of a follow-up question to that. So earlier in the presentation, you mentioned that Salt Lake has a lot of master plans in place, but they don't have, like a typical city has, kind of one big general plan or master plan, and how that sort of played into the development of the guide. Can you guys offer some recommendations on if maybe a city is a few years out, hey, this looks like a really cool project, we want to start setting ourselves up for doing a street typologies guide? What kind of studies do you think would be helpful to have on the front end to kind of tee this up in the future?
I can start with a couple of thoughts there. I mean, I think a lot of communities are doing updates to their general plans now as a result of SB 34 and other legislation. And so I think, you know, if you are doing your general plan update and you are you know, updating what your land use categories are, and you're addressing the kind of questions that SB 34 requires communities to update in general plans, that's going to be a pretty good foundation for something like this. It was critical for our process. Even though we didn't do things the way that we originally thought, it was still really helpful to have that kind of context about, like, the city had already thought about where, you know, priority pedestrian areas were and bicycle routes and where they wanted transit to go. And so the fact that those were all together helped us do this in a much more affordable and efficient way than we would have had to do otherwise. We would have to, you know, have all those conversations, decide what those priorities are, and have it be a lot more complicated. So definitely, filling those requirements that are already kind of out there that people need to do anyway is a good starting point.
Yeah, I think depending on the size of the city, whether you do it sequentially or whether you do it all at once kind of depends on your comfort level as well as the budget that you have for that type of planning. But I would just reiterate that a project like this is really meant to knit everything together. The land use side, the general plan, the values of your community, your transportation plans, and so it can be taken on as something that that helps to knit things that already exist together, or it can just be this overall umbrella, kind of a design alternative approach to a transportation master plan. And that was one question that we juggled for a long time. Do we do our transportation master plan update first, which is now 24 years old, or do we do the typologies first? Do we want the design to affect the policy, or do we want the policy to affect the design? we ended up going with the design guide first, but I don't think that there's a wrong answer. And I think definitely in a community of a smaller size than Salt Lake City, you could probably do both a transportation master plan and the Typologies Design Guide at the same time, because it does help you define those cross sections and designs that may be an essential part to your transportation plan.
Great.
Well covered.
Yeah, good job. And I love the timeliness of SB 34 and linking the land use and transportation and housing element as a lot of cities are working on updating those. So good thoughts there, and something for us all to keep in the back of our minds. The next question comes from Melinda. I love the idea of having more trees along our streets. How do we keep the roots from interfering with roads and sidewalks?
I got it. Urban forestry, our division that's over all public trees, was a pretty critical member of our technical advisory committee. They're within our public lands department underneath public services. And basically we asked them, because this is what we were figuring out with the Typologies Design Guide, how much width do you need to have healthy trees? And they said minimum of 6 feet and ideally 8 feet for really strong root system that doesn't affect sidewalks and doesn't affect the roadway. When we have park strips that are too small, or areas wherever we're planting trees that are too small or too narrow, or the wrong kind of tree for the soil type or for the width, we see either trees having to be cut down after 20 or 30 years and having to restart our urban canopy, or trees falling over in events like we had 2 weeks ago with the windstorm. And we saw a lot of trees that were already weak and that didn't have a very strong root structure because we had limited the amount of space that they had to grow, fall over or lose limbs, or otherwise be catastrophically damaged. So I think that, you know, as terrible as the windstorm was, it was something that showed us really why the Typologies Design Guide is so important, and improving the space that we have for trees is pretty critical to a successful city.
Along those same lines, another tree one from Melinda. We are a small city. Can we require property owners to maintain trees along their park strip?
If Melinda will type into the chat what small city she's from, if you feel comfortable doing that, Melinda. We do in Salt Lake City, we require the property owner to maintain not only the landscaping that's in the park strip, and we require about 30% coverage of soft landscaping so that it's not all hardscaped or xeriscaped. And we also require them to water the tree. Now the tree is public property in the park strip, but because there is that element written into the city code, it is the responsibility of the homeowner to water it. Now, they don't have to pay to maintain it in terms of pruning. They call the urban forestry division and get on a list, and then our arborists come out and prune that tree. Because it is public property, we don't want private property owners to just call up any arborist and have them come prune a tree that doesn't belong to them. And I kind of predicted at the beginning of the project, this park strip area is just such a smorgasbord of responsibilities and overlap, and nobody's really sure, I don't know, is it mine? Is it the city's? I know I have to maintain it, but what can I change about it? And that was one policy discussion that we really wanted to put off until the transportation master plan or later updates to the city code, because it really wasn't a design question, it was more of a policy question. So Melinda, I think in Hyde Park, you can either address it through providing enough space in a design guide, or you can address it through policy, through that transportation master plan update, or through a city code update.
Yeah, just to follow up on that. So Tom, is there within the municipal code in Salt Lake requirements that residents maintain trees in the park strip?
I believe that that's where the requirement is. Yeah, I would have to double check, but I believe that it is. If somebody wants to correct me, I would be happy to be corrected.
So that may be a good point to consider for cities if you are expecting your residents to maintain street trees, having that in the code so that residents understand what their responsibilities are. The next question here is from Jewel. Loved your presentation. We have a transportation grant for next year and it will help. Do you have a handout you can email? This maybe to Meg?
A handout, Jewel, we have both information about the project and handouts about the program that we can certainly share. And yeah, I think that incorporating some of these elements into that project could be really good.
Great. I have another question for you, unless some folks want to add some stuff to the chat. Can you guys talk about sort of the implementation of this and what people in Salt Lake can expect? Are you going to just go in and do all the streets? Are you prioritizing streets? Is it going to be tied to new infill development? What do people expect, and how can they get on the list to get brand new, nice, beautiful trees in their neighborhood?
This is probably the most common question that we got during this last public input period. What does this mean for me, and when is something going to happen? And the simple answer, though it's not an exhaustive answer or something that satisfies everybody, is that we don't know. And the reason why we don't know is because this is only a design guide and is not a master plan or a fiscally constrained plan that identifies the year of construction for different streets. Like I said, we have 8,200 segments of public street in Salt Lake City. That's over, I believe we have 700 or 800 miles of public streets just in Salt Lake City's 110 square miles. So quite a bit. And they are in varying states of either good repair or bad repair. And so we will still depend on our transportation master plan, on our quality transportation implementation process, and on our public elected officials to decide where we should spend money and when we should spend money. But what the design guide will do is offers that kind of a better baseline for when we start to engage the public on a project, so that we can say, hey, this is what we think is a really good starting point. What can we change about it in order to still achieve these goals and still meet the purposes and the goals that you have as a community and as local residents or local businesses. So because it's that reference manual book of ideas only, there's not really a cost or a schedule associated with it, because we really don't know when they're going to be redone or exactly how they're going to be redone. And so that's why we often kind of go like this as an answer to that question. And I think that that's good, because if we were to try to attach a schedule or a cost to it, then we've just transformed our design guide into a master plan, which is something that we did not want to do preemptively. We wanted to wait until we had that policy discussion as a city as a whole, and with all of our stakeholders and partners, and not just those involved in design.
Great, thank you. We're wrapping up here, only a few minutes left. Are there other examples throughout the country of street typology guides that you guys looked at to kind of model this off of, or that you feel are good examples that other cities could take a look at if they're considering about implementing a similar project?
I think Maria and I could probably think of a few. Do you have any, Maria?
Yeah, I referenced this at the beginning, but we did one, Fair and Pierce did, for Alameda County, California. So it's called the Alameda Multimodal Arterials Plan. And it was a lot larger in scale. It was a whole county with 29 communities. And I think I mentioned they didn't have a lot of the base work done. They didn't have the multimodal plans in place and stuff. So there was a lot more that went into that, but was really similar in a lot of ways. There's one also for Montgomery County, Maryland, which is similar in developing kind of like some sort of visionary, you know, typologies, and kind of a similar number of typologies, like a dozen to 15, but it doesn't go to the step of assigning a typology to a specific street. It kind of leaves it up to practitioners to be like, well, based on the characteristics of this road I'm looking at, I think it's a boulevard, or I think it's a town center boulevard, or whatever. I know Denver has done some similar exercises, and we kind of look to them as an example as well. Tom, I know you've got other examples.
Yeah, I say this tongue in cheek, but the only reason why we hired Fair and Pierce is because of that Alameda County plan, and that's where I grew up. So as soon as I saw that, he's
regretted it ever since.
As soon as I saw that at the top of the quals list, I went, okay, yeah, it's Fair and Pierce. That's fine. It was fun to see that connection to my home county, which is on fire right now. So that's convenient. The two that I would recommend, and they're pretty different, but they achieve a lot of the same purposes that ours is trying to achieve, is Seattle, Washington's Streets Illustrated guide. It is very nice and interactive, and will be much like the product that we'll have at the end, which is a map online that you can click around in, and information that you can look at in static and non-static forms. That's a pretty big city. And so it may have some things that apply or don't apply to your community. The other one that I really like, and that I was so surprised by, is Des Moines, Iowa's project. I think it's called, let me look it up real quick. It is really good, and their project manager is my hero. I watched a couple of his webinars that he did to present the project, and learned a lot from him as we were working on ours, in how we communicate the breadth and the scale of this kind of a project, and how it's going to be implemented. It is called Move DSM. They did their transportation master plan and their design guide at the same time. So if you want to just take a look at their typologies as part of that, Move DSM, it is very, very good. And I believe that his contact information is in there. If you just search Move DSM or Des Moines Transportation Plan. And if you can't find it, let me know and I can send that to you.
Great. Well, we're about 3 minutes out here, and I want to make sure I keep the schedule going, and I adhere to the time frame. But I just want to thank you guys so much for sharing your knowledge with us. What an awesome project. I want to put a plug in for the WFRC TLC program. In my previous role as a senior planner in Taylorsville, I took advantage of that program several times. Meg and her team are awesome to work with, and she will provide you guidance and help you through the process. So I encourage you to utilize the TLC program, and feel free to check out the website for this project if you guys have any additional questions or want to get in touch with the panelists. Any closing remarks from you guys?
Thank you, Angela.
Yeah.
Thanks for everybody attending, and we appreciate your time.
Thank you guys so much. Enjoy the rest of the conference and have a great day.